Dig deeper. Who's the shadow owner behind the company that just bought us out on the spot? Sir, it's your ex-wife, the small-town girl you just divorced. My name is Evelyn Hart. At 22, I signed a contract marriage agreement. My grandmother had just passed away. In her final moments, she held my hand and told me the only thing she couldn't bear to leave behind was me alone in this world. I knelt by her hospital bed, crying so hard I could barely breathe, and still she was worrying about me. She said there was this young man, her old friend's grandson, good character, clean family background, just a little cold in temperament, that's all. She wanted me to marry him so I'd have someone to lean on. I couldn't bring myself to refuse a dying woman's kindness. Later, I found out that the man my grandmother described as a little cold in temperament was Adrian Cole, the crown prince of coal industries. The Cole family needed a woman with a spotless background, someone who wouldn't cause trouble. To shut down the infighting over the family trust, Adrian's uncle, Vincent, had taken advantage of Adrian's shaky position as the newly installed CEO and turned his marriage into a weapon, forcing him to either marry strategically or hand over control of the company. Adrian Cole was cold as forged steel. He'd rather marry anyone at random than let himself be manipulated, and so, our contract marriage was born. The terms were simple: 3 years, I'd play his wife, and he'd keep me safe. When the 3 years were up, we'd go our separate ways, and he'd give me a settlement on top. The day I signed the agreement was the first time I ever met Adrian Cole in person. He sat behind his desk, immaculate in his suit, features sharp and forbidding. He looked at me the way you'd look at a document. He said exactly 3 things to me that day. Sign here, 3 years, don't cause trouble, when it's over, you leave. I remember thinking, this man and I are from 2 completely different worlds, but that was fine. I never planned to have anything to do with him anyway. 3 years. It would pass in the blink of an eye, and it did. For 3 years, I played the role of the quiet, agreeable Mrs. Cole. Adrian came home maybe a few times a month, and when he did, he'd shut himself in his study. Occasionally he'd ask me a question or two about household matters, his tone like he was briefing a subordinate. His mother, Margaret, was even harder to deal with. She'd looked down on me from day one, telling anyone who'd listen that I was small town, didn't know the rules, not good enough for her son. I took it all because to me, none of it mattered. I had far more important things to do during those 3 years. No one knew that the meek country wife in the Cole household had another name, the shadow CEO of Summit Holdings. It's a long story. The short version: my grandfather, Harrison Chen, founded Summit Holdings. My mother was his only daughter. She married my father against her family's wishes, and the 2 of them had a falling out that never healed. Later, my parents died in an accident. My grandfather sent someone to bring me back, but by then I'd already lived with my grandmother for years, and she couldn't bear to let me go before he died. My grandfather left a will. He gave me all his shares in Summit Holdings on one condition: I had to prove myself capable of leading the company within 3 years, under the guidance of the executive team he'd designated. Only then could I officially take over. Those 3 years were my probation period in the Cole household. I played the obedient, gentle wife. In the old cottage my grandmother left me, I remotely managed a multi-billion-dollar business empire. Adrian thought I spent my days arranging flowers and cooking meals. In reality, I was in cross-continental video conferences every night. Margaret thought my greatest talent was making a decent dinner. In reality, I just closed an $800 million acquisition. Now, the 3 years were up. My contract marriage to Adrian Cole had reached its natural end. On the day of the divorce, Adrian was home for once. He slid a document across the table toward me, his expression exactly the same as it had been 3 years ago when we signed the agreement, cold as ice that would never melt. The contract is up, he said. Sign it. I glanced down at the divorce papers. The terms were clean enough: a $10 million settlement, plus a penthouse in Tribeca, and a luxury car for Adrian Cole. That was practically generous in his eyes. I was just an orphan from a small town who'd spent 3 years being a well-behaved decoration. I hadn't caused him any trouble. A severance package was more than generous. I picked up the pen and paused over the signature line. Adrian, I said, looking up at him, my voice calm. In these 3 years, was there even one single day when you thought of me as your wife? He frowned. Clearly, he hadn't expected that question. Our relationship was built on a contract from the very beginning, he said flatly. I thought you understood that. I do now. I smiled, and signed my name, Evelyn Hart. 3 words, clean strokes. No hesitation. I set the pen down and stood in the living room. Margaret was sitting on the sofa with her tea. When she saw me come out with my suitcase, she couldn't hide the satisfaction on her face. Leaving already? She set down her teacup. her tone dripping with condescension. Well, the contract's up, after all, Evelyn. I'll be honest, you were never my ideal choice for a daughter-in-law, but you didn't cause us any trouble these 3 years. Keep the penthouse. If things get hard for you later, I'm not above lending a hand. I stopped and turned to look at her. Thank you, Margaret, I said, my voice as warm and agreeable as it had been every single time I'd spoken to her over the past 3 years. But that won't be necessary. She blinked. She hadn't expected me to refuse. So cleanly, I didn't say another word. I walked out the door of the coal estate, suitcase in tow behind me. I heard Margaret's voice, lowered but still sharp. Who does she think she is? A small-town girl putting on airs. The rest was swallowed by the closing door. I stood at the entrance of the estate. The March wind was still cold, but I felt light all over, like I'd shed a shell I'd been carrying for 3 years. I pulled out my phone and dialed 2 rings. A steady male voice answered. Chairwoman Hart, Diana, I said, looking at the skyline in the distance. My voice was nothing like the one I'd used inside the coal mansion, no longer the soft, timid country wife, but sharp, decisive, brooking no argument. Notify the board, the probation period is over. I'm officially taking over Summit Holdings, and the first order of business. I paused, a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. Acquire Coal Industries. There was half a second of silence on the other end, then Diana's voice came through, as professional as ever. Understood. Chairwoman Hart, what's our target stake? Take everything we can get, I said, loading my suitcase into the trunk of the taxi and sliding into the back seat. I want Adrian Cole to see a new owner he doesn't recognize within 3 days. I hung up and leaned my head against the window, watching the coal estate grow smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror. 3 years I'd kept my head down in that house. Invisible. Adrian Cole had never once looked at me properly in his mind. Evelyn Hart was a woman with no background, no ability, and no backbone, a small-town orphan he'd generously given 3 years of stability in exchange for a signature on a contract. He didn't know my past, he didn't know who I really was, he didn't even know that the major project his company had spent the last 6 months chasing was backed by a subsidiary of Summit Holdings. He'd sent 3 teams to negotiate, and none of them had even gotten a meeting with the project lead. That project lead came to my cottage study every Thursday, on the dot, and reported to me with absolute deference. The taxi turned a corner. I pulled my gaze back from the window, and my phone buzzed again. It was Victor Lang, my COO, and one of the mentors my grandfather had left me. Evelyn, I heard you finally signed the papers, Victor said, amusement in his voice. Congratulations on your freedom. Don't start, I shot back, half laughing. That was fast. Did Diana tip you off? Of course, I'm your right hand. Remember, Victor's tone turned serious. Now, business. This acquisition of Coal Industries, are you serious? Or are you just blowing off steam? I'm serious, Evelyn. Victor paused. Coal Industries isn't Summit scale, but it's still a publicly traded company worth 3 to 4 billion. This isn't a small move. Are you sure? I have to remind you, Adrian holds over 30% of the company. He's the majority shareholder. To take control, you'd either need to sweep up every available share on the market, or negotiate with him directly. I know, I said. That's why I'm not trying to swallow it whole. I'll take every share I can get. Minority holders, institutions, retail. What I want is for Summit to become the largest external shareholder of Coal Industries overnight. Victor was silent for a few seconds. You're going to catch him completely off guard. Yes, my voice was calm. He thinks I'm nothing. Right, then let him see exactly how much a woman who can cook can do. The next 3 days saw a textbook capital raid unfold inside Coal Industries. No one saw it coming. No one expected Summit Holdings to strike at coal, and certainly not with this kind of speed. Day 1, 3 investment subsidiaries under Summit moved simultaneously, buying up coal's public float at a 15% premium. By market close, Summit had secured nearly 7% of Coal Industries. Day 2, Diana led her team in one-on-one meetings with coal's minority shareholders. The offer she put on the table made every single one of them widen their eyes. One old shareholder holding 5% signed the transfer agreement on the spot. The other 2 held out for less than half a day before caving. By the close of Day 2, Summit's stake in Coal Industries had climbed to nearly 15%. Day 3, the real killing blow. Victor Lang personally sat down with Coal Industries' second-largest shareholder, Grant Capital Partners, which held 12%. The head of Grant Capital was Harold Grant, a businessman sharp as a razor. He'd been partners with Adrian's father back in the day, and the 2 families had always been close. But Victor only needed one condition to make Harold nod. Summit's new energy project on the East Coast next year would name Grant Capital as its preferred partner. The scale of that project was equivalent to 3 years of Grant Capital's total revenue. Harold Grant signed the share transfer agreement on the spot. 3 days. Summit Holdings had moved with lightning speed, accumulating a total of 27% of coal industries shares, becoming the company's largest external shareholder overnight, second only to Adrian Cole's own 31%. And all of this happened while Adrian Cole was out of town on business. He was called back by an urgent phone call. It was his assistant on the line, that young man who was usually as steady as a rock, his voice now cracking at the edges. "Mr. Cole, you need to come back immediately. Something big has happened at the company." "What is it?" Adrian's voice was as calm as ever. Someone has acquired the company." Adrian's fingers tightened around his phone. "Who?" "Summit Holdings," the assistant said, his voice trembling with barely concealed panic. "They took 27% of the company's shares in 3 days. Mr. Cole, Summit just sent over an official notice. Their new chairwoman is coming to tour the company tomorrow." Adrian was silent for 3 full seconds. "Who is Summit's new chairwoman?" "We can't find out," the assistant said. "Summit's kept everything under lock and key. The outside world only knows they've changed leadership, but the identity hasn't been announced. Mr. Cole, this person is buried deep. We've pulled every string we have and we still can't dig up a background." "Then keep digging." Adrian's voice turned cold as a blade scraping across glass. "Whatever it takes. I want that person's name, background, resume, everything. Before I set foot back in the office." He hung up and pressed his fingers to the bridge of his nose. Summit Holdings. He knew perfectly well that Summit and Coal Industries had always kept to their own lanes. The two companies' business interests barely overlapped, no real competition, no history of bad blood. So why would Summit suddenly make a move on coal? And who the hell was this new chairwoman? The previous chairman had been a low-key operator with an iron fist, a man whose weight was known throughout the industry. Now, with a new leader at the helm, the first fire they lit was aimed directly at Coal Industries. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, this was premeditated. Adrian drove back to the company that same night. The office was blazing with light. Several executives were waiting for him, their faces darker than the night outside. "Mr. Cole, we found her." The assistant hurried over, holding a freshly printed file, his expression so complicated it was hard to read. "Who is the person behind Summit Holdings?" Adrian took the file without looking up. The assistant opened his mouth, then closed it again, as if he didn't know how to say it. "Mr. Cole," he swallowed hard, It's your ex-wife." The air in the office froze solid. Adrian's hand, mid-flip through the file, stopped in midair. He slowly raised his head, and in those eyes that had always been cold and composed, disbelief flickered for the very first time. "What did you say?" "Summit's new chairwoman," the assistant said, his voice hoarse, "is Ms. Evelyn Hart. She completed the internal transition 3 days ago and formally took over all of Summit Holdings' equity and operations." "Mr. Cole, the person who acquired our company is the small-town wife you divorced 3 days ago." The office was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Adrian dropped his gaze and flipped open the file. On the first page, a photograph stared back at him. The woman in the photo wore a sharply tailored navy suit, her hair neatly swept back, and in her eyes was a composure and certainty he had never seen in 3 years. She sat behind a wide executive desk, the Summit Holdings logo behind her. This was not the Evelyn Hart he had known for 3 years. The Evelyn he knew wore plain dresses in muted colors, let her hair hang loose, spoke in a soft, quiet voice, and looked at people with a gentle, timid gaze. She would silently set dinner on the table when he came home. She would keep her head down and say nothing when his mother's words turned sharp and cutting. That Evelyn was a woman without temper, without edges, without any threat at all. But the woman in this photo, her eyes were like a blade hidden in its sheath, sharp, controlled, untouchable. Adrian stared at that photograph for a full 10 seconds. Then he turned the page and found Evelyn Hart's profile. Granddaughter of Harrison Chen, founder of Summit Holdings, enrolled at Wharton School at 18 under an assumed name, entered Summit Holdings executive ranks at 22, remotely managing the company's core operations as a shadow CEO. Over the course of 3 years, led 4 major acquisitions and grew Summit's market value from $12 billion to $30 billion. Adrian's fingers clenched the edge of the file, his knuckles turning white. 3 years. They had been married for 3 years, living under the same roof for 3 years. He had thought she was just an ordinary small-town woman, no background, no ability, nothing worth his attention. He had never even asked her a single question about what she did before. Mr. Cole, the assistant spoke carefully, watching Adrian's face darken, his voice barely above a whisper. There's one more thing. Summit notified us that tomorrow at 9 a.m., MS, Hart will personally visit the company. She's requested an emergency board meeting. Adrian closed the file and looked up. His face had already settled back into its usual cold mask, but the assistant had worked for him for 5 years, and he could see the undercurrent churning beneath those eyes, something he had never witnessed before. Prepare the conference room, Adrian said, tossing the file onto the desk, his voice unreadable. Tomorrow morning, every single board member, no exceptions. He paused, then added one more line. I want to see for myself what this woman, who hid for 3 years, is really capable of. The assistant nodded quickly and turned to leave. Wait, Adrian stopped him. Mr. Cole. Adrian was silent for a moment, as if weighing something. Finally, he spoke, his voice lower than before. Pull up the divorce agreement. The assistant blinked. Now. The assistant hurried out and returned less than 5 minutes later with a photocopy. Adrian took the agreement he had drafted himself and flipped through it page by page. $10 million in settlement, a penthouse in Tribeca, a luxury car. He suddenly felt like these terms were a joke. The head of Summit Holdings, a woman worth $30 billion. And he had given her a $10 million severance package. He remembered the expression on her face when she signed it, calm, even wearing a faint smile. She had asked him, "Did you ever think of me as your wife?" And he had answered so matter-of-factly, as if she had asked a question that wasn't worth thinking about at all. Now he understood. When she asked that question, she wasn't pleading, she wasn't venting, she was giving him one last chance, and he had missed it. Adrian tossed the agreement onto the desk and sank back into his chair, closing his eyes. The office was silent, save for the low hum of the air conditioning. The assistant stood in the doorway, caught between staying and leaving, watching his boss, a man known for his composure, his decisiveness, his total lack of hesitation, show an expression he had never seen before. It wasn't anger, it wasn't regret, it was a deep, consuming bewilderment that threatened to swallow him whole. Mr. Cole, the assistant finally mustered the courage to speak. How should we handle tomorrow's board meeting? Adrian opened his eyes. He stared at the chandelier overhead, silent for a long moment. Hold the line, he said, his voice returning to its usual steadiness, but if you listened closely, you could hear the weight pressing down beneath it. She wants to take over coal industries. It won't be that easy. I still hold 31%. As long as I don't agree, she can't take control, and if she keeps buying more, let her buy, Adrian said, rising to his feet and walking to the floor-to-ceiling window, gazing down at the glittering city below. I want to see what she's really after. Outside the window, the city's nightscape stretched on, a sea of lights flickering in the darkness. Adrian stood at the window, his fingers absently tracing the screen of his phone. On the screen was a number he had never once called in 3 years. He had sent this number fewer than 10 messages, each one no more than a few words. Not coming home tonight, out of town for 3 days, the agreement expires tomorrow, come back and sign. He hadn't even saved her name. The string of digits sat quietly in his contacts, labeled simply, E. Hart. Now, that string of digits belonged to the chairwoman of Summit Holdings, the largest external shareholder of his company, a woman he didn't recognize at all. Deep, unfathomable, and utterly unknown. Adrian stared at that number, and suddenly, a memory surfaced. 3 years ago. On the night the agreement was signed, Evelyn had been sitting alone in the living room, packing her things. He had come downstairs from his study to get a glass of water, and as he passed her, she looked up at him, her eyes bright, as if she wanted to say something. He hadn't stopped walking. Get some rest, he had said, and gone upstairs. He never saw that look in her eyes again for the next 3 years. Her eyes had been gentle, quiet, unremarkable, like still water. Now he knew, beneath that still water, there had been a current all along. Adrian gripped his phone, then let it go. Have the car ready, he said, turning to his assistant. Tomorrow morning at 7, I want to be the first one in the office. That night, Adrian Cole didn't sleep a wink across the city. Evelyn Hart sat in the penthouse office at the top of Summit Holdings Tower, a stack of materials for tomorrow's board meeting spread out before her. Victor Lang lounged on the sofa, a cup of coffee in hand, nervous. You're meeting your ex-husband tomorrow. Evelyn looked up and smiled. That smile was nothing like the ones she had worn in the Cole household back then. She smiled carefully, meekly, as if afraid of disturbing someone. Now she smiled with ease and certainty, her eyes carrying a light that had finally been set free. Nervous about what? She signed the last document and capped her pen. I've been waiting for this day for 3 years. Outside the window, the night stretched on, the city's lights spilling into a brilliant sea of gold in the distance, and Evelyn Hart's battlefield was just beginning. The next morning at 8:30, I stood at the entrance of Cole Tower, tilting my head back to take in the 32-story building. In 3 years, I had never once set foot inside Adrian Cole's company, Adrian Cole's empire, Adrian Cole's world. The contract spelled it out in black and white. None of it had anything to do with me. My only job was to be the ornament waiting at home for him to return. Nothing else was my concern, nothing else was permitted to be my concern. So no one at Cole Industries recognized me. All they knew was that the CEO had married some small-town girl, arranged by his dying grandmother, they said, with no real affection behind it. In 3 years, the CEO's wife had never once shown her face at the company, probably just some out-of-her-depth housewife who couldn't hold her own in polite society. Today, that out-of-her-depth housewife had arrived. I wore a tailored smoke-gray skirt suit, my hair swept back into a low ponytail, 7-centimeter stiletto heels clicking beneath me. Diana Reed followed half a step behind, and behind her, 2 legal counsels from Summit Holdings and a VP of investments. Not a large entourage, but formal enough. As I pushed through the glass doors of Cole Tower, the receptionist at the front desk looked up, froze for a beat, then scrambled to her feet. "Good morning, do you have an appointment?" Before I could speak, Diana stepped forward, her voice quiet but perfectly clear. "Chairwoman Hart of Summit Holdings, here for the board meeting." The receptionist's face went pale in an instant. She'd clearly been notified that an important visitor was expected today, but she certainly hadn't expected that important visitor to be a young woman who looked barely older than herself. "Chairwoman Hart, right this way." She fumbled to lead us toward the elevator, discreetly murmuring into her walkie-talkie as she went. Just before the elevator doors slid shut, I caught the receptionist's wide-eyed stare. She must have been thinking, how can the chairwoman of Summit Holdings be this young? What she didn't know was that the real jaw-dropper was still to come. The elevator climbed steadily, floor numbers ticking upward one by one. Diana briefed me in a low voice. "Cole Industries has set up the main conference room on the top floor. All board members are present." Adrian arrived at 7, a full 2 hours earlier than usual. "Eager, is he?" I said flatly. "I hear he didn't sleep a wink last night," Diana murmured, dropping her voice even lower. "He pulled every string he had to dig into your background." "And what did he find?" "Nothing," Diana said, the corner of her mouth lifting. "Summit's security clearance is the highest tier there is. Your shadow CEO identity over the past 3 years is known only to the core team. All Adrian could dig up is the layer you deliberately left on the surface. An ordinary woman from a small town." I smiled. That identity had been carefully maintained. During 3 years of contract marriage, I'd needed to be an invisible nonentity in the Cole household, so I'd buried myself deep. Every public record pointed to a simple biography: parents dead young, raised by my grandmother in the countryside, unremarkable education, no social connections to speak of. The records were real, they just weren't complete. They were like a jigsaw puzzle showing only the corner pieces, while the full picture at the center remained wrapped tight in Summit Holdings' confidentiality agreements. Adrian couldn't find anything because he'd never thought to look. In his eyes, the name Evelyn Hart wasn't worth a single minute of his time. Ding! The elevator reached the top floor. As the doors slid open, I saw a row of people waiting at the end of the corridor. Cole Industries' entire executive team, all in attendance, standing in suits at the conference room door. At the front stood a man, tall, sharp-featured, cold-eyed. The man I'd been married to for 3 years and divorced from for 3 days. Adrian Cole. He wore a deep black suit today, shirt buttoned all the way to the top. Every inch of him radiated one word: on guard. I took a deep breath inside the elevator, then I stepped out. My heels struck the marble floor with crisp, rhythmic clicks. 1 step, 2, 3. I walked toward that row of waiting gazes, spine straight, pace unhurried, a perfectly calibrated curve at the corner of my mouth, neither too warm nor too cold. The standard business smile. Adrian's eyes locked onto me the moment I exited the elevator. I knew that expression too well. It was the same look he'd worn every time he came home during those 3 years, cold, distant, as if regarding something barely connected to him. But today was different. Today, something else lurked beneath the cold: shock, anger, suspicion, resentment, all of it held in check by his iron self-control, buried deep beneath the iceberg. But if you looked closely, you could see his fingers at his side tightening involuntarily. "Chairwoman Hart," he spoke as I reached him, his voice as steady as ever, even extending a hand in polite greeting. I looked down at that hand. In 3 years, Those hands had never once held mine. Our closest physical contact had been the day we signed the contract. When his fingers accidentally brushed mine, he'd pulled back as if scalded, and from that moment on, there had been no physical contact between us at all. Mr. Cole, I took his hand. Palm against palm for barely a second, politeness itself, but in that single second, I felt his fingers tighten, just slightly, an instinctive reflex, or perhaps an attempt to confirm something, to confirm that the woman standing before him was real, not a hallucination born of a sleepless night. I released his hand and turned my gaze to the executive team behind him. The VP's expressions were a spectacle, eyes bulging, mouths hanging open, one man actually rubbing his eyes, their gazes darted back and forth between Adrian and me, as if watching an impossible magic trick. I knew exactly what they were thinking. How did the CEO's small-town ex-wife become the chairwoman of Summit Holdings? Impossible. Something must be wrong. Everyone, I said, sweeping my gaze across each stunned face. My tone as casual as if discussing the weather. No need to stand on ceremony. Let's go in and start. With that, I walked into the conference room first. A low murmur stirred behind me. Is that really her, the CEO's ex-wife? I've seen photos, it's definitely her. God, who on earth did the CEO marry? Sure, keep your voice down, I pretended not to hear. Walking straight to the head of the conference table, Diana pulled out the chair for me, but I didn't sit down immediately. Instead, I turned to look at Adrian, still standing in the doorway. Mr. Cole, I said, tilting my head slightly, my tone polite and distant. This is your company. The head seat is yours, an utterly ordinary piece of courtesy, but I knew that for Adrian Cole, those words might as well have been a slap in the face, because he knew perfectly well that under coal industries bylaws, when a single external shareholder's stake exceeds 25%, that shareholder has the right to convene an emergency board meeting and serve as its chair. In other words, at today's board meeting, that head seat was rightfully mine. My offering it to him wasn't courtesy, it was a message. I'm in no hurry. I have all the time in the world. Something flickered in Adrian's eyes, an emotion I couldn't read. He was silent for 2 seconds, then he strode in and sat down at the far end of the table, directly across from me. The choice of seat was telling in itself, not the head, not a guest seat, but the position facing me head on, a silent standoff. The conference room fell so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Coal Industries directors filed in one by one, each of them stealing wary glances between Adrian and me, like spectators at a war without gunfire. I opened the file in front of me. Diana stood behind me, ready to hand over documents. Across the table, Adrian spread open his notebook, his assistant beside him with a fine sheen of sweat beading on his forehead. Since everyone's here, let's begin. I closed the file, my gaze traveling down both sides of the long table before settling on Adrian's face. First, let me introduce myself, Evelyn Hart, newly appointed chairwoman and CEO of Summit Holdings. I completed the internal transition 3 days ago and have officially taken over all group operations. My voice was quiet, but in the silent room, every word landed with clarity and force. Summit Holdings currently holds a 27% stake in coal industries, making us the largest external shareholder. Under the company bylaws, I will be joining the coal industries board of directors and participating in all major corporate decisions. When I finished, no one in the room spoke. A few minority shareholders exchanged bewildered glances, still processing the sheer volume of information. Chairwoman Hart, Adrian spoke. His voice was still cold, but something beneath it was threatening to break the surface. I have a question. Go ahead. Summit's acquisition of coal industries shares took place within just 3 days of our divorce, he said, his eyes boring into mine, each word deliberate. I want to know, was this acquisition driven by business considerations, or by personal grievance? Good question. It was exactly what I'd been waiting for, Mr. Cole, I said, one eyebrow lifting slightly, my tone carrying a hint of well-measured surprise. Why would you assume this has anything to do with our personal relationship? Summit's acquisition of coal industries is based on strategic positioning for future markets. Coal's distribution channels on the East Coast align perfectly with Summit's expansion plans for next year. This is a purely commercial transaction. I paused, the corner of my mouth curving upward. As for our personal relationship, Mr. Cole, if I recall correctly, what we had was nothing more than a 3-year contractual arrangement. The agreement expired, and we went our separate ways. Why on earth would I spend billions of dollars to take revenge on someone who means nothing to me? The moment those words left my mouth, Adrian's jaw tightened visibly. I'd said it all with effortless lightness, every word stripping away any hint of personal feeling. But that very detachment was the sharpest blade of all because it told him, "You, to me, aren't worth a single ounce of emotional investment." Adrian stared at me for a long moment. I met his gaze openly, without a flicker of evasion. 3 years. This was the first time I'd stood before him without lowering my head, without stepping aside, without carefully sheathing my own sharp edges. The feeling was absolutely magnificent. "Very well." Adrian finally withdrew his gaze, his voice reverting to that cold, businesslike hardness. "Since this is a commercial matter, let's keep it strictly business." Chairwoman Hart, Summit Holdings now holds a 27% stake. "What are your intentions?" "Simple," I said, leaning back in my chair, fingers interlaced on the table before me. "First, I'll send 2 representatives to join the coal industry's board and participate in corporate governance. Second, I recommend coal industries realign its strategic direction next year, focusing on the East Coast new energy market and pursuing deep collaboration with Summit Holdings. Third," I paused, letting my gaze sweep across everyone in the room. "Third, I have no intention of touching coal industries management. I recognize Mr. Coal's capabilities, and the company's operations team is mature and experienced. Summit Holdings wants win-win cooperation, not a hostile takeover and wholesale replacement of personnel." As soon as I finished, the tension in the boardroom visibly loosened. Several vice presidents who had been sitting rigid with strained faces quietly exhaled in relief. Their greatest fear had been that a new owner would sweep in and purge the ranks, turning coal industries into a mere subsidiary of Summit Holdings. But my explicit assurance that management would remain untouched put half their anxieties to rest. Only Adrian's expression remained unchanged. He knew me too well, or rather, he was beginning to realize he didn't know me at all. A woman who could disguise herself so completely for 3 years, every word she spoke, every expression she wore, could not be taken at face value. "Chairwoman Hart's terms sound quite generous," Adrian said slowly, "but there's one thing I need to confirm." "Go ahead." "During our contract marriage, you concealed your true identity and financial standing from the Cole family." His voice turned cold, carrying the weight of an interrogation. "Per clause 4 of our agreement, neither party may conceal material facts that could affect the other party's interests during the term of the contract." "Does your true identity qualify as a material fact?" There it was. I knew he'd wield the contract against me. Adrian Cole was the kind of man who, when backed into a corner, would scramble for rules, clauses, and any weapon he could use to strike back. His dominance in the business world over these 3 years had been built on this almost ruthless rationality, but he'd forgotten one thing: I was the one who signed that contract. I knew its terms better than anyone. "Mr. Cole," I said, meeting his gaze with composure, a hint of amusement threading through my tone. "Clause 4 states that neither party may conceal material facts that could affect the other party's interests, correct?" "Correct." "Then let me ask you this: what impact did my concealed assets and identity have on your interests?" Adrian's brow furrowed. "During these 3 years, I never used a single resource from Summit Holdings to advance the Cole family's interests, nor did I leverage my position as Mrs. Cole to secure any commercial advantage for Summit Holdings." I said, each word deliberate and unhurried. I quietly played the invisible woman. "I never interfered with a single decision you made. I never harmed a single interest of yours, Mr. Cole. My true identity never affected you in the slightest, from beginning to end. So tell me, how exactly is that a breach of contract?" The air in the boardroom turned to stone. Adrian was speechless because every word I'd spoken was the truth. For 3 years, I had done nothing. Summit Holdings and Coal Industries had no overlapping business. I had never touched a single resource belonging to the Cole family. I was like a clam sealed inside its shell, tucked quietly into a corner, not competing, not grabbing, not making a sound. He had no grounds to call it a breach, but precisely because he had no grounds, it left him even more powerless. Adrian fell silent for a long time, so long that the others in the room began exchanging uneasy glances. "You're right," he finally said, his voice lower than before. "You didn't breach the contract. I won that round, but I showed no trace of triumph. I simply gave a slight nod, as if accepting a perfectly ordinary conclusion. Then that matter is settled," I said. "Next, let's discuss the concrete framework for cooperation." "Diana, wait," Adrian spoke up again. Suddenly, he lifted his head and looked at me, and for the first time, something different flickered in those cold, sharp eyes. Not anger, not resentment, curiosity. It was the look of a man who had just realized he'd missed something profoundly important. "Evelyn," he said, using my full name, his tone no longer the detached formality of business but something far more complex, an emotion he himself probably couldn't name. "Why did you agree to this contract marriage?" That question wasn't on today's agenda. Everyone in the boardroom froze, even Diana, standing behind me, shifted almost imperceptibly. Adrian Cole had asked a purely personal question, utterly unrelated to business, in front of a room full of directors. What was he doing? I looked into his eyes, and suddenly, I understood. He wasn't losing his composure in a board meeting. He genuinely wanted to know the answer. For 3 years, he'd never once thought to understand me. In his eyes, Evelyn Hart was just a small-town woman who'd married him for money, a woman who'd said yes because he'd offered generous terms. He'd never asked why did you agree because he'd never cared about the answer. But now, everything was different. Why would a woman worth $30 billion humble herself to play the role of a silent ornament in someone else's home for 3 years? Once that question took root, it became a thorn buried deep in Adrian's chest, impossible to pull out, only destined to sink deeper. I was silent for a moment. The entire boardroom waited for my answer. Then I smiled. "Mr. Cole," I said, "that question has nothing to do with today's board agenda. If you truly want to know, buy me a cup of coffee sometime, and perhaps I'll tell you." The words were neither a rejection nor a promise, like offering him a step down, and a hook at the same time. Adrian's gaze on me deepened. He was about to say something when the boardroom door was suddenly pushed open from the outside. Everyone turned to look. Standing in the doorway was Margaret Cole, Adrian's mother. She had clearly rushed over in a hurry, her hair slightly disheveled, her makeup not as immaculate as usual. She stood at the threshold, her eyes sweeping across the room before landing on me. Her expression was one I would never forget for the rest of my life: shock, disbelief, humiliated fury, and a trace of belated panic. "You," Margaret's voice trembled. "What are you doing here?" I rose slowly to my feet. "Margaret," I said, my tone as warm and gentle as it had been every time I'd spoken to her over these 3 years, yet everyone in the room could hear the quiet confidence beneath that warmth. "It's been a while." Margaret's face went white, then green, then red. She looked at me, then at Adrian seated across the conference table, then at the assembled directors. Her lips moved as if she wanted to say a great deal, but in the end, only one sentence squeezed out: "What on earth is going on here?" No one answered her because no one in that room could explain it. I picked up the documents on the table and handed them to Diana, then walked around the conference table toward the door. As I passed Margaret, I paused. "Margaret," I said, turning my head slightly toward her, my voice so low that only she could hear it. "Thank you for your 3 years of care. I don't want that settlement anymore. The penthouse and the car are yours to keep. Consider it," I smiled, "consider it my retirement gift to you." With that, I walked out of the boardroom without looking back. Behind me came the sharp intake of Margaret's breath, and the sound of Adrian pushing back his chair and rising to his feet. I didn't turn around. My heels clicked against the marble floor of the corridor. Steady and unhurried, Diana caught up to me, murmuring at my ear, "Chairwoman Hart, Mr. Cole is following you." I curved my lips into a smile. Let him follow, let him chase after me, let him catch up, let him speak, let him say all the words he'd swallowed for 3 years, one by one, and then I'd let him know. Every time over these 3 years he'd looked right through me, every time he'd treated me like air, every time he'd regarded me with that cold, distant gaze. What his wife had been thinking. All along, the elevator doors slid open before me. I stepped inside, and as I turned, I caught a glimpse of Adrian's figure at the far end of the corridor. He stood at the boardroom door, suit immaculate, posture straight as a pine, but the expression on his face was no longer that block of ice that never melted. There was fire in his eyes, fire burning. The moment the elevator doors closed, I looked at my reflection in the polished metal surface and saw the smile on my face for the first time in 3 years. I smiled with such unrestrained satisfaction. 3 days after the board meeting, Adrian's call came through to my private number. He'd had this number saved for 3 years and never once called it. Now, suddenly, he remembered it existed. I watched the name Adrian Cole flashing on my screen and let it ring 5 times before picking up. "Hello, it's me." His voice was as low as ever, but there was something more in it: hesitation, deliberation. "I know," I said, leaning back in my office chair, twirling a pen between my fingers. "Something I can do for you, Mr. Cole." 2 seconds of silence on the other end. "You said last time that if I wanted the answer, I should buy you a cup of coffee." I raised an eyebrow. I'd only said that casually at the board meeting. I never expected him to take it seriously. Adrian Cole was a man who never wasted time on anything unrelated to work. Getting him to dinner was harder than getting him to attend a board meeting. "So, tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon, Skyline Restaurant, he said. Are you free? Skyline Restaurant, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, perched atop the tallest building downtown, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling glass with a panoramic view of the entire skyline. Reservations required at least a month in advance, of course. For Adrian Cole, that was nothing. Let me check my schedule, I said, deliberately flipping a couple of pages on the desk calendar so he could hear the paper rustling through the phone. Tomorrow at 3, yes, that works. Meeting just got cancelled. In reality, I had no meetings tomorrow afternoon at all, but letting him think I was squeezing him into a packed schedule that felt wonderful. Then it's settled. Adrian paused after saying that. I thought he would hang up. That was how he always ended our calls before business done. Line dead, not even a courtesy goodbye, but this time, he didn't. Evelyn, he said my name in 3 years. He'd said my name maybe a handful of times, always the full, formal version. Evelyn Hart, in the same tone he'd used with a subordinate. Today was the first time I'd heard even a hint of warmth in it. Yes, nothing, he said at last, the words trailing off. See you tomorrow. The line went dead. I stared at the phone screen for a long moment, then pressed the intercom. Diana, look into what Adrian Cole has been up to lately. Diana's voice came through the speaker, carrying a note of satisfaction. Chairwoman Hart, since you asked me to keep an eye on Cole Industries, I've actually turned up quite a bit. Go on. Adrian has spent the past few days completely reorganizing every department that touches our business. He's also set up a dedicated liaison team for Summit Holdings. And a hint of amusement crept into her voice. He sent his mother back to the family estate. I blinked. Back to the estate. Yes, word is, Mrs. Cole showed up at the office the next day to make a scene, and Adrian personally escorted her out. He said one thing to her, and I'm quoting directly, Mom, if you keep this up, Cole Industries won't survive. I leaned back in my chair and laughed out loud. Margaret Cole. I knew that woman better than anyone. 3 years of cold shoulders, holiday dinners where she'd take every opportunity to cut me down in front of the relatives, calling me that small-town girl who doesn't belong at this table. Now her own son had told her that the small-town girl could change the name on the building whenever she felt like it. For Margaret, that had to sting worse than death itself. Anything else? One more thing. Diana's tone turned serious. Chairwoman Hart, do you remember Adrian's uncle, Vincent Cole? Yes, we've learned that Vincent has been meeting frequently with people from Grant Capital Partners. He seems deeply unhappy that they sold their Cole Industries shares to us. He's been saying privately that he won't let the company fall into outside hands. My eyes went cold. I'd met Vincent Cole a few times, over the 3 years. He'd come to the family estate for dinner now and then, always looking down at me with that smug expression, always making it clear in one way or another that I didn't deserve a seat at that table. He was a branch of the Cole family who'd lost the succession battle to Adrian years ago. He'd pretended to accept the outcome, but underneath, he'd never stopped scheming. Keep a close eye on him, I said. He's the most restless one in that family. Understood. The next afternoon at 3 o'clock, I walked into Skyline Restaurant right on time. Adrian was already there. He sat at a table by the window, an untouched cup of coffee in front of him. Beyond the glass, the city sprawled out in full panorama, glass towers glittering in the afternoon sun. When he saw me walk in, he stood up. That surprised me. In 3 years, he'd never once risen for me. I'd walk into a room and he wouldn't look up. I'd leave and he wouldn't watch me go. Today, he stood. Sit, he said. I took the seat across from him and set my bag down beside me. A waiter appeared with menus. I ordered a latte without much thought. You've lost weight. Adrian was looking at me, and the words came out of nowhere. I raised my eyes to meet his. Adrian Cole was not a man who noticed changes in other people's appearances. In 3 years, I'd changed my hair, changed my wardrobe, and he'd never once registered any of it. And today he'd noticed I'd lost weight. I've been busy lately, I said flatly. The Summit transition taking a toll. It's fine, I said, easier than living in the Cole household. The moment the words left my mouth, I saw something darken in his eyes. He knew exactly what I meant. Those 3 years in his family's estate, the daily cold remarks from his mother, the backhanded barbs from relatives at every family gathering, the constant performance of being a proper, modest Mrs. Cole, had been more exhausting than running a public company could ever be. Evelyn, Adrian was quiet for a long moment before he spoke again. I asked you here today because I want to ask you something. Go ahead. 3 years ago, why did you agree to marry me? He'd asked me this once before, at the board meeting. I hadn't answered then. Today, he'd made a special trip to ask the same question again. I looked into his eyes and felt something almost like amusement. Adrian Cole, you're finally curious about me. After 3 years of treating me like air, after shoving divorce papers in my face, after discovering who I really am, now you want to know, because of my grandmother, I said, my voice even, she was dying and couldn't bear to leave me alone. Your grandmother and she were old sisters from way back. The two of them worked it out at her bedside. I couldn't refuse her. Adrian's brow furrowed slightly. That's all. That's all. I took a sip of my coffee. What else would it be? Your family's money. Or you. He choked on that 3 years ago. That's exactly what he'd assumed. He thought a woman from nowhere who agreed to a contract marriage could only be after money, so he treated me from start to finish like a tool, paid to perform, nothing more. Then why didn't you tell me who you really were? He pressed. Because there was no need. I set my cup down and looked at him. Adrian, think about it. 3 years of marriage. How many times did you actually talk to me? Did you ever once ask what I did before? Did you ever care what I did all day at home? He said nothing. Because he had no answer. 3 years. Over 1,000 days and nights. The words he'd spoken to me in all that time probably didn't add up to what he said in a single project meeting. You never asked, so I had no reason to tell you, I said. And honestly, even if I had told you back then, would you have believed me? You'd have thought the small-town girl was spinning fairy tales. Adrian's lips pressed into a thin line. He knew I was telling the truth. If I'd told him 3 years ago that I was the heir to Summit Holdings, he probably would have nodded expressionlessly, then told his assistant to check whether I'd lost my mind. Evelyn, he started to say something, then stopped. Adrian Cole's greatest flaw was that he didn't know how to express himself. His world was targets, plans, execution, results, no emotion, no warmth, no human connection. He could talk a rival into silence in a boardroom, but faced with one question from his ex-wife, he couldn't manage a single complete apology. Forget it, I waved a hand. It's in the past, the 3-year contract is up, and we go our separate ways. That was the agreement from the start, wasn't it? I never imagined it would end like this. Like what? I smiled. You can't handle the fact that I'm now your largest shareholder. Adrian looked up at me, his gaze deep. You know what I mean? He wasn't talking about the shares, he was talking about the fact that he'd spent 3 years and never once seen me, the woman who waited for him at home every night, the woman who kept her head down when his mother attacked her, the woman who signed the divorce papers with unsettling calm. He had never truly looked at her, and now that he'd finally seen the real Evelyn Hart, she was already gone. Adrian, I leaned back in my chair, letting my tone lighten. Don't dwell on the past. The only relationship we have now is a business one, Summit and Cole as partners. Let's keep it professional. Nothing else matters. Nothing else matters. He repeated the words, his voice dropping low. I didn't answer. Sunlight streamed through the window, pooling on the table. The rim of my coffee cup caught the light in a soft halo. The city outside was quiet and lazy, traffic crawling along the distant streets. I don't think it's nothing. Adrian spoke suddenly, his voice lower and heavier than before. I looked up at him. His expression was still that cold, composed mask, but there was something different in his eyes now, something I'd never seen before. Not when we signed the agreement, not in any moment across 3 years, not on the day he handed me the divorce papers. Evelyn, give me a chance. When Adrian said those words, there was no ruthless business edge in his voice, no boardroom pressure. He sounded like a man who'd realized too late that he'd lost something precious. Clumsily reaching out to grab it back, not knowing how much force to use, I held his gaze for a long, long moment. Adrian, when I finally spoke, my voice was softer than before, but only a little. Some things can't be taken back just because you've decided you want them. I stood up. The coffee's on me. I have work to get back to. I turned and walked away, my heels striking the wooden floor with a dull rhythm. Behind me, no chair scraped against the floor. Adrian didn't follow. He sat alone at that table by the window, 2 cups of coffee slowly going cold in front of him. From that day on, Adrian Cole was a changed man. The next morning, when I arrived at the office, the front desk told me someone had sent flowers. I walked over and found a large bouquet of white roses sitting quietly on the reception counter. No card, no name. Who sent these? The florist delivered them, said a gentleman ordered them. No name left. I looked down at the roses. White, not red. He knew I didn't like flashy things. How did he know that? In 3 years of marriage, he'd never once sent me flowers. Leave them there, I said, and headed upstairs. I didn't take the bouquet with me, but I didn't throw it away either. For the next week, a fresh bouquet of white roses arrived at the front desk every single morning. Diana's looks at me grew increasingly knowing, and Victor even teased me openly during a meeting. Chairwoman Hart, your love life is really heating up. Shut up and start the meeting. I said without looking up. Besides sending flowers, Fu Chenhan had done something even more outrageous. He personally delivered the cooperation proposal between the Fu Group and Shanghua to my office. Normally, a document of this level would have been enough to send a vice president to deliver, but Fu Chenhan insisted on coming himself, sitting on the sofa in my reception room in his suit and tie, placing a cooperation proposal over 60 pages thick on the coffee table. Chairman Fu delivering the proposal personally. I sat across from him, flipping through 2 pages of the document. Doesn't the Fu Group have any couriers? The cooperation with Shanghua is a project I oversee personally, he said without changing his expression. Delivering it myself shows sincerity. Oh, I closed the proposal. I've received your sincerity. I'll read the proposal at my leisure. Chairman Fu, you can head back now. He didn't move. It's almost mealtime. Fu Chenhan glanced at his watch, his tone as natural as if he'd asked 100 times before. How about lunch together? I stared at him for 3 seconds. Fu Chenhan, are you trying to pursue me? Yes, he answered crisply. Without a hint of hesitation, his directness caught me off guard. The old Fu Chenhan would never have said something like that. The word pursue didn't exist in his dictionary. He believed all relationships should be exchanges of interest, clear-cut, with no loose ends. Then you might be disappointed. I stood up, walked behind my desk, and sat down. I'm not interested in my ex-husband. That's fine. He also stood up, his expression unchanged. I'm very interested in my ex-wife. With that, he turned and left, leaving behind a cooperation proposal and a remark that left me speechless. When Secretary Ju poked her head in, I was still sitting in my chair, dazed. Chairman Shen, are you all right? I'm fine. I rubbed my brow. Take the Fu Group's cooperation proposal to the investment department and have them give an evaluation within 3 days. Understood. Also, Chairman Shen, General Lin Zhao asked me to remind you that there's a charity gala for the new energy industry on Friday evening, and you've agreed to attend. Got it. Friday evening's charity gala became the turning point of the whole affair. The gala was hosted by the Municipal Federation of Industry and Commerce, and all the big names in the business world were there. When I walked into the banquet hall in a black velvet gown, arm in arm with Lin Zhao, many people turned to look. The new chairman of the Shanghua Group making her first public appearance was enough to grab attention on its own, combined with the fact that I'd kept a low profile before. With outsiders knowing almost nothing about me, my entrance naturally made me the center of attention. Nervous, Lin Zhao whispered in my ear. What's there to be nervous about? I picked up a glass of champagne, my gaze sweeping across the banquet hall. Then I saw Fu Chenhan. He was standing at the other end of the hall, talking to a few people. He was wearing a navy suit tonight, and the tie was one I'd bought him before. I remembered that tie because after I bought it, he never wore it once. Saying he didn't like the color today, he was wearing it. Our eyes met across half the banquet hall. He raised his glass slightly toward me. I looked away. Halfway through the gala, the host began the auction segment. This kind of charity auction was a standard feature of such events. Each family donated items to be auctioned off, with the proceeds going to charity. I donated a set of jade jewelry from my private collection, left to me by my grandmother. It wasn't anything exorbitantly priced, but it was elegant and antique in its warmth, with a starting bid of 200,000. The bidding began, several ladies raised their paddles in succession, and the price slowly climbed from 200,000 to 400,000. I wasn't paying much attention, looking down and talking to Lin Zhao, when I suddenly heard the auctioneer's voice rise. Chairman Fu of the Fu Group, 1 million. I jerked my head up. Fu Chenhan stood among the crowd, his paddle still raised. The lights hit his face, and his expression was as calm as if he'd just bought a head of cabbage at the market. A low murmur and applause rippled through the room. A set of jade jewelry with a starting bid of 200,000 being called to 1 million, and by Fu Chenhan himself. That alone was big news. 1.5 million. Another voice rang out. I turned to look. The one raising the paddle was a middle-aged man, slightly stout, with a faint, ambiguous smile on his face. Fu Shihong, Fu Chenhan's second uncle. 2 million. Fu Chenhan raised his paddle. 2.5 million. Fu Shihong followed. 3 million. Fu Chenhan said without changing his expression. The atmosphere in the banquet hall had grown tense. Everyone could feel it. This was no longer a bidding war. This was a showdown. The uncle and nephew of the Fu family were locking horns in front of the city's elite, and what they were fighting over was a set of jade donated by Fu Chenhan's ex-wife. Fu Shihong glanced at Fu Chenhan, a knowing smile curling at the corner of his mouth. 5 million. The whole room gasped. 5 million for a set of jade jewelry. This wasn't a matter of overpaying anymore. This was madness. Fu Chenhan's hand holding the paddle paused for a moment. He turned his gaze toward Fu Shihong, and their eyes collided in midair, as if sparks could fly. 10 million. Fu Chenhan's voice wasn't loud, but it carried clearly across the entire banquet hall. Everyone was stunned. 10 million. That price exceeded the total of all the items auctioned tonight, and it exceeded everyone's expectations. The auctioneer's voice was trembling. 10 million. Going once. 10 million. Going twice. 10 million. Going 3 times. Sold. Congratulations, Chairman Fu. Thunderous applause erupted. Fu Chenhan lowered his paddle, adjusted his suit cuff, his expression still cold and composed, as if spending 10 million on a set of jade was the most normal thing in the world. I stood there, nearly losing my grip on my champagne glass. Lin Zhao leaned in and whispered, "Is your ex-husband insane?" "Probably," I said. After the auction segment ended, I found Fu Chenhan. He was standing on the terrace outside the banquet hall, a glass of wine in hand, alone in the night breeze. "Are you crazy?" I walked up to him, lowering my voice. "Spending 10 million on my jewelry set." He turned to look at me, his eyes unusually deep in the darkness. "That jade was left to you by your grandmother," he said. "It shouldn't fall into someone else's hands." I froze. How did he know the jade was from my grandmother? I'd never told him. "I looked into it," Fu Chenhan said, as if reading my question, his tone light. "Over this period, I've looked into everything I could find about you. Your upbringing, your education, how you took over Shenghua, and your grandmother." When he said the word grandmother, his voice noticeably softened. "I know she was the person you cared about most. That jewelry was her gift to you. You shouldn't have donated it for charity. So I donated the money, and you take the jewelry back." I stood in the night breeze, momentarily at a loss for words. In 3 years, he'd never taken the initiative to learn anything about me. Now that we were divorced, he was digging into my past. "Fu Chenhan," I took a deep breath. "What you're doing is pointless. Whether it's pointless is for me to decide," he said, looking at me with a seriousness bordering on stubbornness. "Nianwei, I'm not trying to make up for anything, and I'm not trying to win you over. I just think that jewelry has special meaning to you, so I wanted to get it back for you." He held out the auction certificate to me. The thin piece of paper fluttered gently in the night breeze. "Take it." I looked down at the certificate, then up at his face. This Fu Chenhan, in this moment, was a completely different person from the one I'd known for 3 years. I reached out and took the certificate. "Thank you," I said, my voice softer than before. "But this doesn't change anything." "I know," he said. "I didn't spend 10 million to buy anything back. I just did what I wanted to do." With that, he turned and walked back into the banquet hall. I stood alone on the terrace, clutching the auction certificate, watching his figure disappear into the brightly lit hall. The night breeze blew over, carrying the slight chill of early summer. Suddenly, I remembered something. 3 years ago, when we'd just gotten married, I was sitting in the living room one day flipping through my grandmother's photo album. Fu Chenhan came out of the study to get water and paused as he passed by me. He glanced down at the album in my hands. "Your grandmother?" he asked. "Yeah," I nodded. He was silent for a moment, then said nothing and went upstairs. I thought he didn't care at all. Now I knew he remembered. It just took him 3 years to let me know. I tightened my grip on the auction certificate, and something stirred softly in my chest. But what I didn't know was that tonight's events were far from over. In a place I couldn't see, Fu Shihong was standing in a corner of the banquet hall, a glass of red wine in hand, his gaze cold and fixed on my direction. Beside him stood a man, boss he of Hongyuan Capital, the one who had sold the Fu Group shares to Shenghua, president he. Fu Shihong swirled his glass gently, his voice low enough for only the two of them to hear. "Tell me, if a person accidentally takes a fall, and falls hard enough, do you think they can never get back up again?" Boss he turned to look at him, his expression shifting slightly. "President Fu, what do you mean?" "I don't mean anything." Fu Shihong took a sip of wine, the curve of his mouth cold and dangerous. "I just think some people are standing too high, and it's time they took a tumble." After the charity gala, I thought things would settle down for a while. Fu Chenhan went quiet for a few days. No daily flowers, no excuses to come to my office to discuss cooperation. I figured he'd probably come to his senses. After all, someone like Fu Chenhan wouldn't dwell on one thing for too long. There were always more important matters in his world waiting for him, and an ex-wife, no matter how formidable, was just a thing of the past, not worth wasting too much time on. But it turned out I was wrong. He didn't come to see me, not because he'd given up, but because he'd changed his approach. That morning, after my weekly meeting wrapped up, I returned to my office and found a new document waiting on my desk. Not just any document, it was a meticulously bound project proposal with a gilded cover. The Coal Industries logo was embossed on the front, and the title read, Coal Industries and Summit Holdings Strategic Partnership White Paper. I opened the first page and froze. The structure, the formatting, even the font spacing, everything about this white paper matched my personal style. Even the way the headings were phrased mirrored the exact expression habits I used when drafting my own proposals. How did he know how I write proposals? I lived in the Cole household for 3 years and never once wrote anything in front of him. My study was in the old estate, and he never set foot in it. My work habits, my writing style, my thought process, where on earth did he learn all of this? I pressed the intercom. Diana, who delivered this proposal from Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole delivered it personally, Diana said, her voice carrying a barely suppressed laugh. His car was parked outside our building at 7:30 this morning. He waited a full 2 hours just to hand it to you in person when you arrived. I intercepted him and told him you had a morning meeting, so he asked me to pass it along. 7:30 in the morning, Adrian Cole used to roll into his own office at 9:30. Now he was waiting outside someone else's building at 7:30. Did he say anything else? He said if you have any dissatisfaction with the proposal, you can call him anytime, he'll keep his phone on 24 hours. I hung up the intercom, leaned back in my chair, and stared at the white paper for a long time. 24 hours. Adrian used to turn his phone off after 10 o'clock at night. Calls wouldn't go through, messages went unanswered. Once, in the middle of the night, I came down with a high fever. I called him over a dozen times, all went to voicemail. In the end, I dragged myself to a cab and went to the hospital alone. When he came home the next day, he saw the fever medicine on the coffee table and asked, "Caught a cold?" I said yes. He never asked again back then. I thought he just didn't care about me. Later, I realized he genuinely didn't know how to care. In his mind, caught a cold was a statement of fact, not something requiring a response. It wasn't that he was being deliberately cold, he simply had never learned how to be otherwise. But now, he'd learned to wait for me downstairs at 7:30 in the morning. He'd learned the format I use for proposals. He'd learned to say 24 hours. I remembered what Victor had told me before. Men are a species that showers you with attention when they're chasing you, then turns indifferent once they've caught you. Don't let Adrian's current behavior fool you. But the thing is, Adrian isn't like other men. Other men are attentive first, indifferent later. He was indifferent for 3 years, and only then started being attentive. With that order reversed, the whole situation became impossible to judge. That afternoon, I went to Coal Industries as planned for the second board meeting to discuss the specifics of our partnership. The meeting was even more high stakes than the last one. Adrian had summoned every department head in the company. The conference room was packed with over 20 people. The moment I walked in, everyone rose to their feet in unison. "Good morning, Chairwoman Hart." With that kind of reception, you'd think a head of state was visiting. I nodded and walked to my seat. This time, Adrian didn't sit across from me, he sat right beside me. "Today we're discussing the partnership proposal," he said, leaning in and lowering his voice, his tone as natural as if we sat in meetings together every day. "If there's anything you're not satisfied with, just say the word. I'll have them revise it on the spot." On the spot, I glanced at him. "Mr. Cole, you're remarkably efficient. I learned from you," he said. "After you took over Summit, you implemented that real-time decision making protocol. I read the coverage, it boosted efficiency by 40%. I borrowed the concept. When he said I learned from you, there was a sincerity in his voice that I couldn't quite define. I looked away and opened the file in front of me. The meeting went smoothly. Cole's team had clearly done their homework, every detail was thoroughly considered. My VP of Investments had come prepared with a list of questions, but after flipping through the proposal, he found that most of his concerns had already been addressed in advance. "Mr. Cole," I said, closing the file and turning to him, "how long did your team spend on this proposal?" 10 days. "You can't produce a proposal this detailed in 10 days, I said, calling him out directly. "Be honest." Adrian fell silent. His assistant spoke up quietly from the side. "Chairwoman Hart, Mr. Cole only slept 4 hours a night for those 10 days. The proposal went through 17 revisions, and Mr. Cole personally reviewed every single version. Last night, the final draft was approved." Mr. Cole stayed in his office until 3 in the morning. The conference room fell quiet for a moment. I turned to look at Adrian. Sure enough, there was a faint shadow of fatigue under his eyes, but he was the type who could power through anything, suit on, spine straight. "You'd never notice unless you looked closely, Mr. Cole," I said, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "This isn't worth it. Whether it's worth it is for me to decide," he replied in the same low tone, his gaze intense. "This proposal isn't just for Coal Industries, It's to show you I'm not just a hands-off partner. He was talking about being a hands-off partner for 3 years. That's exactly what he'd been, leaving his wife at home, ignoring her, coming back only a few times a month, treating the house like a hotel, eat, go upstairs, leave early the next morning. That's what he meant. I held his gaze for 2 seconds, then looked away. I'll accept the proposal, I said, standing up and speaking at a normal volume. I'll review the details back at my office. If there are any issues, my team will coordinate with yours. That's all for today. After the meeting, I walked out quickly, not giving him a chance to catch me for a private word, but just as I reached the elevator, Adrian caught up from behind. Evelyn. I stopped but didn't turn around. Friday night, he said, Cole Industries is hosting its anniversary gala. I'd like to invite you. If it's a business event, I'll have Diana arrange it into my schedule. It's not a business event, he said, stepping forward to stand beside me. I'm asking you personally, as my date. The elevator doors opened in front of me, then closed again. I didn't step in. Adrian, I said, turning to face him, what exactly are you trying to do? I'm trying to win you back, he said, his tone as calm as if he were stating a settled fact. I already said it at Skyline Restaurant last time. You didn't take me seriously, so I'll say it again. People passed by in the corridor, stealing glances in our direction. The CEO of Cole Industries confessing to his ex-wife in the hallway. That wasn't a sight you saw every day. We're divorced, I said. I know, the contract expired. The relationship is over. I know. Do you even remember how you treated me before? That question finally made him pause, but only for a moment. I know I treated you badly before, he said, his voice lower than before but more earnest. Not just badly, I didn't take you seriously at all. I thought you were just someone who signed a contract to play a role. I put you in the house, gave you food and clothes, and thought I'd done my duty. I never asked why you agreed to this marriage. I never asked if you were happy. His throat moved. Evelyn, I know it's too late to say this now, but I still want to say it. I regret it. Not because you became the chairwoman of Summit Holdings, not because you have money and power. I regret that for 3 years, I never once truly looked at you. I regret that on the day we signed the divorce papers, you asked me a question, and I didn't even understand it at the time. Did you ever, for even one day, think of me as your wife? That day in the Cole family living room, I'd asked him that question. His answer then was our relationship was built on a contract from the very beginning. Now he stood in the corridor of Cole Industries, telling me he regretted it. I looked into his eyes, those eyes that had been cold for 3 years now held emotions I didn't recognize, but it wasn't enough. 3 years was too long. He couldn't erase it with a few sentences. Nothing in this world was that cheap. Adrian, I said, some things take time to prove. Words alone aren't enough. I know, he said immediately, his eyes brightening because he'd caught the opening in my words. I hadn't outright refused him. I'm not in a hurry. I have all the time in the world. 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whenever you're ready to look at me again, I'll be there. The elevator doors opened again. I stepped inside just as the doors were closing. I heard Adrian's final words, Friday night, I'll be waiting. Friday night, I ended up going to Cole Industries' anniversary gala, not because of his invitation, because Summit Holdings and Cole Industries had just signed a strategic partnership agreement, and as the head of the partner company, it was my duty to attend such an occasion. That's what I told myself. The gala was held at a 5-star hotel, owned by Cole Industries. The scale was impressive. Nearly every prominent business figure in the city was in attendance. I wore a deep blue velvet gown, my hair loosely pinned at the nape of my neck, paired with pearl stud earrings, simple and elegant, befitting my current status. The moment I arrived at the hotel entrance, I saw Adrian. He was standing by the revolving door, glancing toward the entrance every few seconds, with several Cole Industries executives behind him. The CEO of Cole Industries, instead of greeting guests inside the ballroom, personally standing guard at the front door. The image was jarring, to say the least. When he saw my car pull up, he strode toward me. You came. There was a carefully restrained joy in his voice when he said those 2 words. I'm here for a business event, I emphasized. It doesn't mean anything. I know, he said, offering his arm. Shall we? I hesitated for a moment, then finally placed my hand on his arm. His arm was solid beneath the fabric of his suit, the warmth of his body bleeding through the material. In 3 years of marriage, we had never once walked side by side like this. The closest we'd ever come to intimacy was the day he sat across from me signing the agreement. As we stepped into the ballroom, nearly every pair of eyes swung toward us, an ex-husband and ex-wife showing up to the same gala together. That image alone was gossip gold. The business elite clustered around with their champagne flutes, still chatting and laughing on the surface, but their gazes kept darting our way, sharp and hungry. I walked forward with an unreadable expression. At some point, Adrian's hand had settled lightly at the small of my back, a gentlemanly touch, fingers barely resting there, no actual pressure, but the gesture said everything. Mr. Cole, an older entrepreneur with silver hair, approached, glass in hand, beaming at us both. So this is Chairwoman Hart of Summit Holdings, young, accomplished, and striking. Truly impressive, Mr. Chen. Adrian inclined his head slightly. Allow me to introduce you. This is Evelyn Hart, Chairwoman and CEO of Summit Holdings, and this is Walter Chen, founder of Chengbang Industries. Mr. Chen, a pleasure. I extended my hand politely. No, the pleasure is mine, Walter Chen said, clasping my hand firmly. His gaze swept between Adrian and me, a knowing smile spreading across his face. Mr. Cole, you've got good taste. Adrian didn't deny it. He even turned his head slightly to look at me, a faint, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I withdrew my hand with a perfectly neutral expression, making a mental note to have words with him after the gala. Midway through the evening, the host invited Adrian to the stage for a speech. He walked up, the spotlight catching him, every gaze in the room converging on his figure. Thank you all for attending Cole Industries' anniversary celebration, he said, his voice steady and commanding. Just like his presence in the boardroom, Cole Industries has reached where it is today because of the trust and support of everyone in this room. Tonight, I want to extend a special thank you to one person. His gaze cut through the crowd and landed squarely on me, standing below the stage, a bad feeling coiled in my stomach. Chairwoman Evelyn Hart of Summit Holdings, he said, thank you for choosing to partner with Cole Industries. I will not let that trust down. Thunderous applause erupted. Every head swiveling in my direction, I maintained a composed smile and nodded toward the stage. All while cursing inwardly. Adrian Cole, you did that on purpose. On the surface, his words were a simple thank you to a business partner, but everyone in that room knew our history. Standing in front of the city's elite, thanking his ex-wife, the subtext was unmistakable to anyone with ears. As the gala wound down, I was making my exit when Adrian caught up to me again. I'll drive you. I have a car. Send the driver home, he said. I'll take you. His tone left no room for argument. I held his gaze for a moment, then finally nodded. The car glided smoothly out of the hotel. Inside, it was quiet, only the whisper of the air conditioning and the muffled sounds of the city drifting in through the windows. Adrian drove with focus, the lines of his profile flickering in and out of shadow as streetlights passed. Evelyn, thank you for coming tonight. I told you, it's a business event, whatever it was, he said. I'm glad you came. I turned to look out the window, the city's nightscape streaking past in a blur of neon and shadow. Adrian, I said suddenly, you weren't like this before. Like what? You wouldn't say things like I'm glad. You wouldn't chase after someone with flowers and proposals and wait outside their building. You used to think all of that was a waste of time. He was silent for a long moment. That's because I didn't know what losing felt like, he said, his voice cutting through the quiet of the car. I thought you'd always be there, whether I came home or not, whether I cared or not, you'd be in that house waiting. 3 years, you never left, so I got used to it, used to you being there, and used to ignoring you being there. His fingers tightened on the steering wheel, until you left, and I realized. He paused. Realized what? Realized that without you in it, that house was nothing. The car came to a stop at a red light. He turned to look at me, the streetlight spilling through the window and washing over his face, softening the hard lines of those perpetually cold eyes. Evelyn, I know I'm 3 years late, but I still want to try. I looked at him, saying nothing. The light turned green. The car moved forward again. That night, when I got home, I stood by the window looking out at the city lights and found myself remembering things I'd buried deep. I remembered the first time I went to the Cole family estate. Margaret Cole gave me a once-over, then turned to the housekeeper and said, set up a guest room for her, a newlywed wife staying in the guest room, and I hadn't even felt wronged by it. I remembered the first family gathering Adrian took me to. Someone muttered behind my back, so this is the small-town girl. I pretended not to hear. He pretended not to hear too. I remembered the time I cooked an entire table of food waiting for him to come home, and he'd left on a business trip without telling me. I sat alone at the dining table until midnight. The next day he came back, saw the leftover dishes, and said, next time, don't wait up for me. I'd gotten through all those days alone. Now he was the one regretting, chasing after me, saying all the things he never would have said before. Should I believe him? I didn't know. But one thing was clear in my mind when he stood on that terrace at the charity gala and handed me the auction certificate, when he stayed up 10 nights straight to revise a partnership proposal that fit my style perfectly, when he said, "What your grandmother left you shouldn't fall into someone else's hands." The wall I'd built over 3 years had quietly developed a crack. The next morning, my phone rang. "Victor Lang, Evelyn, we have a problem." Victor's voice had never sounded this grave. I sat straight up in bed. "What happened?" Vincent made his move. My heart sank. "Tell me everything." Early this morning, an article went up online. Title: The Truth Behind Summit Holdings' New Leader, 3 Years of Hidden Marriage Exposed. It spills everything: your background, your marriage history, even the details of how the Cole family treated you. The angle is vicious. It doesn't attack you directly, it uses this tone of sympathy, like, behind every strong woman is endless heartbreak, 3 years of being cold-shouldered by her in-laws, and all she got was a divorce agreement. Victor took a deep breath. The article has blown up, over 2 million shares across platforms. The comments are split, some people support you, but more are questioning Summit's stock stability. You know how jumpy investors are. Your personal image is tied to Summit's share price. If this keeps gaining traction, when the market opens tomorrow, Summit's stock is going to drop at least 5%. I swung out of bed, opening my laptop as I spoke. "Did you trace who posted it?" The article was published through a third-party marketing account, no direct link to Vincent on the surface, but I dug into it using our resources. The account is tied to an overseas number, and that number's registration info overlaps with Vincent's assistant's social media accounts. "It's Vincent, 90% certain," Victor said, "but there's no direct evidence. We can't touch him yet." "Then don't touch him," I said. "Contain the damage first. I've already activated the crisis response team. But PR alone won't fix this. Evelyn, you need a strategy." The most poisonous thing about this article is that everything in it is true, it's just framed in the most malicious way possible. The more you deny it, the more guilty you look. I stared at the article on my screen, scanning through it quickly. Vincent had done his homework. The information he'd gathered was comprehensive: my family background, the details of the contract marriage, even specifics that only someone inside the Cole family would know, like Margaret calling me a bought bride in front of relatives, like the fact that Adrian had come home only a handful of times in 3 years. Ordinary people couldn't fabricate these details. Someone inside the family had provided them, and the person inside that family who hated me most, besides Adrian's mother Margaret, I couldn't think of anyone else. "Victor," I said, "issue a brief statement first. Say that Summit Holdings operations are completely normal, and that the chairwoman's personal history has no bearing on the company's decisions or management. Also, prepare a press conference. I'll handle it personally. Are you sure you want to face this yourself? The public sentiment is hostile right now. You'll take a lot of heat. Hiding is the worst move," I said, already opening my closet. "Vincent wants me to go cry in a corner. I'm not going to give him that satisfaction." "Understood. I'll make the arrangements. Press conference at 3 this afternoon." I hung up, and almost immediately, my phone rang again. Adrian. I picked up. "Evelyn." His voice was urgent, background noise loud, like he was in a car. "Have you seen the article?" "Yes." "It was my uncle," he said, anger barely contained in his voice. "And my mother. She conspired with Vincent to leak everything about you." "Evelyn, I'm sorry, this is my fault. The Cole family owes you better. You don't need to apologize for your mother," I said calmly. "She never owed me anything, and I never expected kindness from her. I've already dealt with her," Adrian said. "She won't come near you again." "What do you mean?" "I sent her abroad. She'll be well taken care of at a retreat center there." I held the phone, frozen for 2 full seconds. Adrian sent his own mother out of the country. Margaret Cole was a woman who valued face above all else, more than her own life. Being exiled abroad by her own son would wound her more deeply than death itself. Adrian had gone that far. "For me, you didn't have to do that," I said. "She's still your mother." "She's my mother, which means half of what she did to you is my fault," Adrian said, his voice dropping low. "I didn't protect you for 3 years, so she felt emboldened to push further." "Evelyn, from now on, no one is going to hurt you, no one." I held the phone, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. On the other end of the line, I heard the screech of brakes, then the sound of a car door opening. "Are you home right now?" "Yes." "Open the door." I blinked, walked over, and pulled it open. Adrian Cole was standing right there. He was wearing a shirt that wasn't fully buttoned, his hair slightly disheveled. He'd clearly rushed straight over the moment he got the news. His phone was still clenched in his hand, his eyes bloodshot, the whole of him radiating a barely contained fury that had been forcibly suppressed. But the moment he saw me, that edge of violence melted away. He looked me over from head to toe, like he was making sure I was still in one piece. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "I'm not made of paper. One article isn't going to break me." Adrian walked into the living room, then suddenly turned around to face me, his expression serious to the point of gravity. "Evelyn, I need to talk to you." "Go ahead. Vincent's target isn't just you," he said. "After Summit and Coal Industries signed that agreement, there's been a lot of internal opposition. Vincent has been trying to push me out for a long time. Now that Summit and Coal are tied together, hitting you is hitting me. This move of his, it's killing two birds with one stone." "I know, so this isn't just your problem." He took a step forward. "It's ours." The word ours carried an unusual weight coming from his mouth. I leaned against the doorframe and watched him, waiting for him to continue. "Vincent has more cards to play," Adrian said. "My people found out he's been privately contacting several minority shareholders. He wants to introduce a motion at the next board meeting, demanding that Coal Industries withdraw from the partnership with Summit, using your personal image as the reason. It threatens the stability of the collaboration. If that motion passes, Summit's reputation takes a hit, Coal's stock price collapses with it, and he can swoop in to buy up shares at rock-bottom prices and seize control in one go." I let that sink in for a moment, then smiled. "Mr. Cole," I said, "your uncle is playing a pretty ambitious game, and you can still laugh about it. Why not?" I walked over and sat down on the sofa. "He wants to cause trouble at the board meeting, but that's only possible if he can even get into the boardroom." Adrian's brow twitched. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what you found is only what he wanted you to find," I said, leaning back against the couch, my tone as casual as if we were discussing the weather. "Vincent's real play isn't courting the minority shareholders, it's courting your partners. He's been meeting with Harold Grant of Grant Capital Partners quite frequently lately. Do you know what they've been talking about?" "Grant, didn't he already sell his shares to Summit?" "Selling doesn't mean he can't buy back in," I said. "What if someone offers him a better price than I did?" Adrian's eyes sharpened instantly. "You're saying Vincent wants to buy shares back from Summit?" "Not buy back." I shook my head. "He wants Grant to act as an intermediary and peel off a portion of Summit's holdings. Grant Capital sold us 12%, Vincent holds 5% himself. If he gets another 10% through Grant's connections, his stake will surpass yours." Adrian was silent for a few seconds. "How long have you known?" "Victor found out 3 days ago," I said. "I just didn't tell you." "Why?" I looked at him, my gaze steady. "Because I wanted to know whether you'd come to me on your own." The meaning behind those words was clear enough. I wanted to know if Adrian had come to me because he genuinely wanted to help or just as an excuse to get close to me. Adrian's eyes deepened as he looked at me. "Evelyn, I didn't come here for the company." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm telling you all this now." We held each other's gaze, something unspoken passing silently through the air between us. Finally, Adrian took a deep breath and sat down across from me. "What's your plan?" "Vincent wants to make his move at Monday's board meeting, so let him," I said. "But what he doesn't know is that the people he's trying to win over stopped being his a long time ago." "What do you mean?" "Harold Grant signed a supplemental agreement with me yesterday," I said, pulling a document out from under the coffee table and handing it to him. "He's committed that for the next 3 years, he won't transfer or pledge any of his remaining coal-related interests in any form. In exchange, Grant Capital Partners gets exclusive partner status on Summit's new energy project next year." Adrian took the document, flipped it open, scanned it, and then looked up at me. His expression was complicated: surprise, admiration, and something else I couldn't quite name. "You had this planned all along, in business. You always keep a card up your sleeve," I said. "You taught me that." "When did I ever teach you that?" "I've watched every negotiation you've ever had," I said with a smile. "Mr. Cole, did you think I was just sitting in that study at the estate for 3 years holding video conferences? I had channels to get the meeting records of every major negotiation you conducted, your tactics, your strategies, your habits. I studied all of it. You were my best business education." Adrian just stared at me. He probably never imagined that his trophy wife, the woman who stayed home, had spent 3 years treating him as her case study. "So now you're my rival," he said slowly, "and my teacher," something like that. He laughed. Adrian rarely laughed. In 3 years of marriage, I could count his genuine smiles on one hand. But now he was laughing. The curve of his mouth wasn't wide, but the light in his eyes was real. "Evelyn Hart," he said, "you are genuinely the most impressive woman I have ever met." "Flattery noted," I said, standing up. "Now I need to get ready for the press conference." Vincent wants to see me cry, so I'll show him exactly what I look like standing in the spotlight. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, dozens of media outlets packed Summit Holdings press hall to capacity. The article had blown up even worse than I'd anticipated. It wasn't just business media, even entertainment gossip accounts had jumped on it, each headline more sensational than the last. Inside the billionaire contract marriage, the $30 chairwoman's 3 years of silence, ex-husband begging for reconciliation. The love life of Summit's leader remains a mystery. I stood behind the curtain backstage, peering through the gap at the scene outside. Camera flashes went off in relentless bursts. Reporters had their lenses and microphones trained on the podium. Everyone was waiting for me to walk out, waiting to hear a response explosive enough to satisfy the frenzy. Victor stood beside me, his voice low, nervous. "No," I said, "I spent 3 years being invisible in the Cole household. Standing in the spotlight now actually feels more natural." Victor glanced at me, something like pride flickering in his eyes. "As long as you fight for yourself, no one can take you down." I smiled, adjusted the collar of my suit, and stepped onto the podium. The flashes went absolutely wild in that instant, the shutter sounds merging into a single roar. Every camera was on me, every pair of eyes was fixed on my face. I walked to the center of the stage, placed my hands lightly on the lectern, and swept my gaze across the sea of reporters. "Thank you all for coming. I'm Evelyn Hart, Chairwoman and CEO of Summit Holdings." My voice carried through the microphone across the entire hall, clear, steady, certain. "Regarding the article circulating online today, I have only 3 things to say." The hall went so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Every person in the room held up their recorders and cameras, waiting for my response. First, the events described in the article are, for the most part, true. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. The reporters clearly hadn't expected me to admit it so directly. Everyone froze for a beat. Then the whispering began. I raised a hand to quiet them and continued. "I did sign a 3-year contract marriage. I did spend a period of time in the Cole household where I wasn't treated with respect. I won't deny those experiences, and I won't pretend they didn't happen. They're part of my life, and there's nothing to hide. Second, that experience did not affect my ability to lead Summit Holdings." My voice rose a notch. During the 3 years I was fulfilling that contract marriage, Summit Holdings' market value grew from $12 billion to $30 billion. Through remote management, I led 4 major acquisitions and expanded Summit's business footprint across the East Coast, the South, and the Southwest. These results are publicly verifiable. Any financial journalists here who are interested can contact our PR department after the press conference for detailed data. A few reporters in the audience nodded involuntarily. Third, I paused, my gaze sharpening. Third, the person who spread this article isn't concerned about my personal history. Their goal is to attack Summit Holdings by attacking me. I want to take this opportunity to tell that person, "I'll take your punches, and I can see every move you're making, but don't forget, business disputes are settled in the business arena. Dragging innocent people into it only proves how low your tactics are." I leaned forward slightly, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of a hammer. "See you at the Coal Industries board meeting on Monday." With that, I straightened up and nodded politely to the audience. "That concludes my statement. Thank you." The hall was silent for a full 3 seconds, then erupted into thunderous applause. Reporters were practically climbing over each other to raise their hands, the flashes nearly turning the stage white, but I had already turned and walked off, leaving the candé to the PR team. Victor was waiting for me backstage, his expression like he was trying not to laugh. That "see you at the board meeting" line was brutal. "You basically called Vincent out by name." "I never said his name," I said, taking the water he handed me and taking a sip. "If he wants to put himself in that seat, that's his problem. Tomorrow's headline is going to be that exact quote. Mysterious chairwoman fires back at hit piece. "See you at the board meeting." Good. Saves us the advertising budget. I'd barely finished speaking when my phone rang. "Adrian Cole, I watched your entire press conference." His voice carried an emotion he couldn't quite name, something between pride and ache. "When you said you were not respected in the Cole family," I clenched my fists so hard my knuckles went white. "It was the truth." "I know." He paused, the silence heavy between us. "And that's exactly why it hurts so much, Evelyn. Every single one of those moments, they're debts I owe you." "It's in the past," I said. "Right now, we have more important things to handle." "You're right." Adrian's voice steadied, taking on that measured, commanding tone I knew so well. "Monday, Vincent will call an emergency board meeting. I've received the notice. He's rallied 3 minority shareholders, enough voting power to force the meeting. He plans to put forward 3 motions. First, terminate the strategic partnership between Coal Industries and Summit Holdings. Second, remove me as CEO. Third, hold a new election for chairman of the board. Ambitious appetite. He thinks he has it in the bag. Adrian let out a cold laugh. What he doesn't know is that 2 of those 3 minority shareholders he's been courting called me yesterday. They defected. Not defected, they were never truly on his side to begin with. Vincent is too arrogant. He thinks his offers are irresistible, but he fails to understand that people care more about Coal Industries' long-term stability. Following him on a reckless gamble, in the end, they'd be the ones paying the price. So Monday's showdown, you've already got it handled. I do. Adrian paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. But I still want to ask you for a favor. What kind of favor? Monday, come to Coal Industries. His voice softened into something I'd never heard from him, a vulnerability, almost, not as the chairwoman of Summit Holdings, but as the person Adrian Cole trusts most in this world. Stand beside me. Both ends of the line fell silent. After a long moment, I said something I never expected to hear myself say. Okay. Monday morning, I stood at the entrance of Coal Tower once again, but this time was different. The last time I'd come here, it was to catch Adrian off guard, to show him exactly how much the small-town girl he'd looked down on was capable of. That day, I'd walked into his territory like a conqueror, flanked by my Summit Holdings team, armed with leverage, carrying 3 years of swallowed pride and simmering resentment. This time, I was here to stand beside him. Adrian was waiting for me at the entrance himself. He wore that navy suit, and the tie I'd given him. When he saw my car pull up, he walked over and opened the door for me. You came. We walked into Coal Tower side by side, stepping into the elevator together. It was just the 2 of us in that confined space. His shoulder nearly brushing mine. Nervous? He asked. That question should be directed at you. I turned to look at him. You're the one being impeached today, not me. I'm not nervous. A small smile tugged at his lips. With you here, I'm not afraid of anything. The elevator reached the top floor. The boardroom was already packed. Vincent sat at the head of the table, flanked by a cluster of minority shareholders, his expression radiating smug confidence. When he saw Adrian and me walk in together, his smile flickered for just a fraction of a second before snapping back into that mask of certainty. Well, Chairwoman Hart honors us with her presence. Vincent leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs with theatrical nonchalance. This is a Coal Industries board meeting. As an outside shareholder, you're welcome to sit in and observe. After all, your affairs with the Cole family are on a completely different level. He bit down hard on the word level, making it unmistakably clear he considered me beneath the Coles. Adrian opened his mouth to respond, but I placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. Mr. Vincent Cole. I pulled out a chair and sat down, my voice pitched perfectly, not too loud, not too soft, but clear enough for every person in that room to hear. You're right. I'm not here to attend the board meeting. Vincent's smile widened. I'm here because I've just acquired another 5% of Coal Industries shares. His smile froze, combined with the 27% Summit Holdings already owns. I opened the file in front of me, my tone as casual as if I were reading off a lunch menu. Summit Holdings now holds 32% of Coal Industries. According to the company's bylaws, any single shareholder holding over 30% possesses veto power. Even if every single person in this room voted to remove Adrian as CEO, my vote alone would strike it down. The boardroom went dead silent. Vincent's face cycled through shades, white to red to purple, finally settling on an ugly ashen grey. That's impossible. He shot to his feet, jabbing a finger at me. Where did you get 5%? There aren't that many shares in public float. There aren't. I pulled a share transfer agreement from my folder and laid it flat on the table. But your good partner, the one you'd been courting, made the right choice at the critical moment. Vincent's eyes dropped to the document. Then all the strength seemed to drain from his body, and he collapsed back into his chair. The signature on that agreement belonged to the very minority shareholder he'd spent months trying to win over, Mr. Vincent Cole. I closed my folder, meeting his gaze directly. You said a moment ago that I don't belong on the same level as the Coles. Let me tell you something. The reason I can sit here today has nothing to do with the Cole family's charity, nothing to do with a contract marriage, and certainly nothing to do with whether someone like you approves of me or not. It's because of me. I rose to my feet, planting both hands on the table, looking down at him from above. You're welcome to keep looking down on me, but remember this, your contempt isn't worth a dime. Vincent couldn't find a single word to say. Adrian stood beside me, silent throughout. But the way he looked at me, his eyes held an entire galaxy of stars. After the board meeting, Vincent slunk away in disgrace. Every single one of his motions was voted down, and the minority shareholders he'd tried to rally defected one by one. Coal Industries' operational control and Adrian's position as CEO were both secured. More importantly, the partnership between Coal Industries and Summit Holdings moved forward without a hitch. The storm hadn't torn the two companies apart, it had only made their foundation stronger. As we walked out of the boardroom, Adrian suddenly caught my wrist. "Evelyn." I turned to look at him. He stood in the doorway of the conference room, the Coal Industries emblem behind him, the city's sunlight flooding in through the floor-to-ceiling windows at his side. He looked at me the way you'd look at someone you'd never truly known before, and also the way you'd look at someone you'd finally, truly come to know. "Thank you, don't thank me." I shook my head. "This is just part of the business partnership. Helping you is helping myself. It's not about the business partnership." His voice was quiet, earnest. "You didn't have to come in person. Summit's shares were already in place. Vincent couldn't have caused any real trouble. You came yourself to give me the confidence." I didn't deny it because that was exactly what I'd been thinking. "Adrian." I turned to face him fully. "Have you ever asked yourself why Vincent was able to corner you like this?" He blinked, caught off guard. "Because you don't guard yourself against the people around you." I said, "You treat every relationship like a business transaction. You think that as long as the terms are negotiated and the contract is signed, people will play by the rules. But Vincent was never going to play by the rules. You almost got brought down because you trusted the system too much." Adrian was silent for a few seconds, then he nodded slowly. "You're right." So, I pulled a folder from my bag and handed it to him. Inside is evidence of Vincent using Coal Industries' resources for personal side deals, kickbacks, and misappropriation of company funds over the years. I had Diana Reed spend 2 months gathering it. Whether you use it and how you use it is entirely your call. Adrian took the folder, flipped through several pages, and his eyes grew colder with each one. "This is enough to put Vincent in prison. So the decision is yours now." I met his gaze. "He's your uncle. His family, how to handle him should be your choice." He closed the folder and looked at me for a long, searching moment. "You've done this much for me. How can I ever repay you?" "You don't need to." I smiled. "What you owe me, that's not something that can be repaid this way." "I know." His voice was low, certain. "That's why I'll spend the rest of my life paying it back slowly." I looked at the sincerity in his expression, and the wall I'd spent 3 years building around my heart cracked open with even wider fissures. What happened next? The whole city knew Vincent Coal was placed under criminal investigation for 3 charges: embezzlement, misappropriation of funds, and commercial bribery. His case moved fast. Trial began in less than 3 months. When the final verdict was read, Vincent collapsed in the courtroom and had to be dragged out by bailiffs. The news dominated every headline that day. Every financial media outlet covered it. Some said Adrian was too ruthless, turning on his own uncle. Others said he was decisive and strong, exactly what a leader should be. But no one knew that the evidence that destroyed Vincent Coal had been placed in Adrian's hands by me, and I had no intention of telling anyone. That was our secret. After the dust settled on Vincent's downfall, Adrian did something that shocked the entire city. He booked the largest ballroom at the Grand Meridian Hotel and invited every notable figure in the city. No one knew what he was planning. The invitation bore only a single line: "Please witness the most important moment of my life." That evening, I assumed I was attending an ordinary business dinner. Victor insisted on accompanying me, claiming he had a feeling something big was going to happen tonight. The ballroom was breathtaking. Thousands of white roses cascaded from the ceiling, forming a sea of white flowers suspended overhead. The lighting was a warm, golden glow, and a band played soft music in the corner. The whole scene didn't feel like a business dinner at all. It felt like a wedding. Victor whispered in my ear. I shot him a look. All the guests had arrived, even old-timers like Walter Chen. Everyone held champagne glasses and murmured in low voices, curiosity and anticipation written across every face. Then Adrian appeared. He wore a white suit, immaculate from head to toe. He walked alone to the center of the banquet hall, a spotlight falling on him as every gaze in the room converged. "Ladies and gentlemen." His voice was steady and solemn, cutting through every whisper in the room. "Thank you all for coming tonight." The banquet hall fell silent. "I've invited you here tonight to bear witness to something." He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. The moment that box appeared, a wave of murmurs swept through the crowd, because everyone could tell that was a ring box. Adrian Coal held the ring box and walked across the entire banquet hall, step by step, toward me. The crowd parted automatically on both sides, clearing a path for him. He reached me, and before I could even process what was happening, he dropped to one knee. Gasps rippled through the room. Cameras flashed wildly as everyone pulled out their phones and aimed them at us. Adrian looked up at me, his eyes carrying a mixture of nervousness, hope, and a kind of reverence I had never seen on his face before. Evelyn, he opened the ring box, and a dazzling diamond ring sparkled under the lights. 3 years ago, you chose me when you had no idea who I truly was. For 3 years, I failed you when I should have been the one to treasure you most. And now, 3 years later, when fate has pushed you back into my path, his Adam's apple bobbed heavily, I want to formally get to know you again, to pursue you, to protect you. He pulled a document from his pocket and unfolded it, laying it flat on the floor. It was a share transfer agreement, all 31% of coal industries' equity, transferred unconditionally to Evelyn Hart. Beside it lay a declaration: if she accepted his proposal, those shares would serve as his engagement gift. If she refused, the shares would still be transferred to her free of charge, as compensation for 3 years of neglect. The entire room went dead silent. Everyone stared with wide eyes at the document on the floor. 31% of coal industries, that was everything Adrian owned. He was staking his entire fortune on a single chance to start over. Evelyn, he said, his voice trembling slightly, I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. 3 years of neglect can't be repaid with a stack of shares. I'm only asking for a chance. Let me spend the rest of my life truly getting to know you, truly cherishing you, truly loving you. He knelt there, looking up at me, the lights of the entire banquet hall reflected in his eyes, and a small reflection of me too. All the sounds around us faded away, those raised phones, those astonished stares, those whispers, all of it receded into a blurry background. My world narrowed to the man kneeling before me. I looked down into his eyes and saw all the absence and regret of the past 3 years, and also the sincerity and earnestness of this moment. I remembered him saying, give me a chance at the Skyline restaurant. I remembered him handing me the auction certificate on the terrace of the charity gala. I remembered him saying I regret it in the hallway. I remembered the 17 versions of the partnership proposal he'd revised over 10 sleepless nights. I remembered him standing at my doorstep, saying no one will ever bully you again. I remembered him at the board meeting today, looking at me with eyes full of stars. That heart, I'd guarded it myself for 3 years. Now, someone was willing to stake everything he owned to win it. I looked down at Adrian and suddenly smiled. Adrian, yes, he answered faster than lightning. You've given me everything you own. What are you going to use to take care of me now? He froze for a second, then his eyes lit up. He actually stammered for once. I can work for you. You be the chairwoman. I'll be your assistant. Anything Diana can do, I can do, and what she can't do, I'll learn. A former CEO of coal industries. As my assistant, that's a waste of talent. It's not a waste, he said seriously. Working for you is the most worthwhile thing I'll ever do. I watched him kneeling there, dead serious about becoming my assistant, and I felt that wall I'd built for 3 years come crashing down, not pushed over. I tore it down myself. Get up, I said, reaching out my hand. The floor is cold. He took my hand and stood, but his eyes were still nervous, because I hadn't answered his question yet. I looked at his anxious expression and found it hard to believe this was the same man who was ruthless in the boardroom. Right now, he looked like a child waiting for his exam results. Adrian, I said, I don't need money. Summit Holdings has $30 billion. I don't need shares either. You should keep those for your retirement. His eyes dimmed for a moment, but his eyes lit up again. What I need, I said, looking at him steadily, is a person. Someone who truly treats me as his wife. Someone who sees me as just Evelyn, whether I'm a small-town orphan or the chairwoman of Summit Holdings. That ring, I glanced down at the box in his hand. If you'd pulled it out 3 years ago, I would have put it on without hesitation. But now you'll have to win me over again. Something in Adrian's eyes shattered and then reformed. It wasn't disappointment, it was even firmer resolve. Fine, he tucked the ring away, but pushed the share transfer agreement toward me again. The shares are still yours, whether you let me pursue you or not. This is what I owe you. I don't want it. I pushed the document back. You keep it. It's an engagement gift. You haven't won me yet. What engagement gift? A muffled burst of laughter erupted from the side. I turned to look. Victor Lang was recording everything on his phone, laughing so hard he was nearly bent over. Old Walter Chen was shaking his head and chuckling beside him. All the business tycoons in the room had completely lost their composure, laughing like a bunch of bystanders at a street show. Only then did Adrian remember there were still a few hundred people watching. His ears turned red, a rare sight, but he quickly recovered his commanding presence. turned to face the crowd, and cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, forget the formalities." Walter Chen waved his hand, grinning. "We all saw it. Mr. Cole's proposal failed." The whole room burst into laughter. "It didn't fail," Adrian corrected, his voice louder than before. "It's a fresh start." He turned back to me and extended his hand. "Miss Evelyn Hart, my name is Adrian Cole. I'm 31 years old, CEO of Cole Industries. I used to be an asshole, and now I want to learn how to be a good man. So, may I pursue you?" The entire room went quiet, waiting for my answer. I looked into his eyes, those eyes that had once been cold and distant, now filled with hope, and saw a completely different man, not the Adrian who signed the contract like a block of ice, not the Adrian who treated me like air for 3 years, not the Adrian who cornered me relentlessly at the board meeting. This was a man who had cast aside all his pride and coldness, willing to learn how to love someone from scratch. I placed my hand in his. Yes, he gripped my hand tightly, as if holding on to the most precious thing in the world. Thunderous applause and cheers erupted in the banquet hall. The band struck up a tune at just the right moment, not a wedding march, but a soft, gentle jazz. Adrian held my hand and leaned down to whisper in my ear, "This time, I won't make you wait 3 years." I looked up at him, the corner of my mouth lifting. "We'll see." And he truly didn't make me wait 3 years. One morning, 3 months later, I opened my door to find him standing there, holding a steaming bowl of wonton soup, the kind he'd queued half an hour for at an old family shop across the city. "Good morning," he said. "It's a beautiful day. Can I take you somewhere, Adrian? Do you know what time it is?" 6:30, he said without a hint of shame. "A man who's pursuing you should wake up earlier than everyone else." I was speechless at his logic. He took me to the beach. By the time we reached the shore, the sun had just leapt above the horizon, painting the entire ocean gold. Waves crashed against the sand one after another, and the sea breeze carried a salty tang. He led me onto the sand, then suddenly crouched down. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer, he just used his finger to write in the wet sand. Stroke by stroke, Evelyn, 3 letters, a little crooked, the kind that would wash away with the next wave. Then he wrote 3 more letters beside them, Adrian. The 2 names sat side by side, like some permanent mark pressed into the beach. Even though the waves would soon erase them, he stood up, brushed the sand off his hands, and turned to look at me. "Evelyn, I'm not good with pretty words. I've missed too many chances before. The only thing I want to do now is make sure that every morning when you wake up, you know someone is thinking about you." A wave rolled in, washing over the 6 letters in the sand, slowly fading them away, but nothing could wash away the look in Adrian's eyes. That look held the morning sunlight, the gentleness of the sea breeze, and the complete transformation of a man from cold to passionate. I reached out and wrapped my arms around him. He whispered in my ear, "Evelyn, marry me." This time, there were no crowds of guests, no stacks of share transfer agreements, no flashing cameras or applause, just the dawn, the waves, and his racing heartbeat. "Yes," I answered him in the sea breeze, my voice soft but steady. He held me tighter, his chin resting on top of my head, and I heard his long, trembling breath. This man who never showed weakness in the boardroom in this moment. In my arms, his eyes turned red. The wedding was set for 2 months later. We didn't choose some luxury hotel. We held it in the garden behind the old cottage, the one my grandmother had left me. There was an osmanthus tree in the yard that she'd planted with her own hands. As a child, I used to wait under that tree while she picked the flowers to make osmanthus cakes. Those were my warmest memories. Adrian said a wedding should be held in the warmest place of all. So he turned the entire garden into a wedding venue, strings of tiny white lights woven through the osmanthus tree, white roses scattered across the lawn, and exactly 20 seats for the guests, only the people closest to them were invited. Victor Lang stood as their best man. He held the microphone on the small platform, his eyes redder than hers. "Evelyn, you're the most remarkable woman I've ever known. You carried yourself through the hardest 3 years alone. You built an empire alone. You proved every single person who ever looked down on you dead wrong. As your mentor, your partner, your friend, I'm handing you over to him today. Adrian, if you ever dare to make her cry again, she won't even have to lift a finger. I'll buy your company out from under you first." Adrian nodded solemnly from where he stood below the platform. "I won't let her shed another tear, not one." After the ceremony ended, Evelyn placed her bouquet in front of her grandmother's portrait in the photograph. Grandma Rose smiled with the same gentle warmth she'd had 3 years ago, when she'd held Evelyn's hand and said, "You take care of yourself, sweetheart." "Grandma," Evelyn said silently, "I got married. He wasn't good to me before, but he's changed now. Don't worry about me, I'll be just fine." That night, after the last guest had gone home, only the two of them remained in the garden. Adrian took her hand and led her to sit beneath the osmanthus tree. The little lights strung through its branches blinked softly, like low-hanging stars in the night sky. Evelyn, I've been wanting to ask you something. What is it? He paused for a moment, as if searching for the right words. Why didn't you ever tell your grandmother the truth? You had Summit Holdings. You didn't need to marry a stranger. You didn't have to put yourself through that. She leaned back against the trunk of the osmanthus tree and looked up at the stars scattered across the sky. Because Grandma genuinely loved your grandmother, she said. The two of them made a promise at each other's bedside. If I'd told her the truth and that promise fell apart because of it, she would have carried that regret with her to the very end. I couldn't let her leave this world with unfinished business. So you sacrificed 3 years of your life for that. It wasn't really a sacrifice, she said, turning to look at him. Those 3 years, I was invisible in your house, sure, but I also grew Summit Holdings from 12 billion to 30 billion. Honestly, I should thank you. You gave me a perfectly quiet environment to focus on my work. Adrian stared at her, caught somewhere between exasperation and amusement. So what you're saying is, my 3 years of neglect actually helped you? Pretty much, she said with a grin. If you'd been clinging to me every day, I never would have had time to run my company. He shook his head and pulled her into his arms. The night breeze rustled through the osmanthus leaves, stirring up a soft whisper. In the distance, the city lights flickered on and off like an endless river of stars that never faded. Evelyn, his voice came low and tender in the darkness. For the rest of my life, I'm going to cling to you every single day. Will you still have time to run your company? I will, she murmured, leaning into his chest with her eyes closed. The company is mine, and so are you. He laughed. That laugh drifted through the quiet night like a warm wind, scattering every shadow of the past 3 years. She kept her eyes closed, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her cheek. When a memory surfaced unbidden, the night she'd signed the agreement 3 years ago, she'd sat alone in the Cole family living room, packing her things. He'd walked past her, and she'd looked up at him, wanting to say something. What she'd wanted to say was, Adrian, maybe one day you'll want to know who I really am. Those words had come 3 years too late, but at least he hadn't made her wait any longer than that. A month later, every media outlet in the city was running the same headline: Coal Industries CEO marries Summit Holdings chairwoman. The front page story featured a large photograph Adrian bending down to kiss Evelyn's forehead during the wedding, the osmanthus tree strung with white lights glowing behind them. The headline itself was only 4 words: home is where the heart is. Those were the exact words she'd told the reporters. They'd asked her what it felt like to marry her ex-husband. She'd said, it wasn't marrying an ex-husband, it was marrying a man who'd taken 3 years to finally learn how to cherish her. Home is where the heart is, and her heart had finally come home.